Picture this. When Neymar Jr. was just 4 months old, he was involved in a terrifying car crash. He was left completely trapped underneath a seat, and miraculously, he survived with barely a scratch. Just a little bleeding on his forehead. Looking back, that was the very first time he defied impossible odds. But man, it certainly wouldn't be the last. Today, in this explainer, we're unpacking the incredibly cinematic, exhilarating, and ultimately heartbreaking story of one of the most uniquely gifted athletes to ever step onto a football pitch. We're tracking the complete rise and fall of Neymar Jr. This is really a tragic hero narrative. It's the story of a once-in-a-generation talent, a player whose destiny seemed completely pre-written from the exact moment he learned how to walk. Growing up, he didn't just carry a team, he grew up to carry the suffocating, almost unimaginable weight of an entire nation. He was the chosen one. He was burdened with the impossible expectation of putting on that sacred yellow number 10 shirt, returning Brazil to its World Cup glory days, and succeeding the undisputed kings of the sport like Pelé, Zico, Ronaldo, and Ronaldinho. It's a story of dizzying highs, agonizing physical lows, and a deeply polarizing legacy that football fans are going to be fiercely debating for decades to come.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because to truly understand the sheer whiplash of his career trajectory, you really just have to look at two entirely distinct eras. Back in 2011, when he was tearing it up for Santos in Brazil, Neymar wasn't just a highly touted prospect. No, he was an absolute phenomenon. He was universally hailed as the next Pelé. We're talking about a teenager blessed with explosive pace, 5-star dribbling, and this infectious, joyful flair that literally made the entire footballing world fall in love with the game all over again. He was the undisputed prince of Brazilian football. But then, fast forward to 2023, at just 31 years old, which, by the way, is an age where absolute legends like Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo were busy lifting Ballon d'Or trophies, Neymar signed with Al-Hilal in the Saudi Pro League. He moves thousands of miles away from the bright, defining lights of Europe's elite, and shortly into this new journey, he suffered a devastating torn ACL, sidelining him yet again. So the huge question we have to ask is, how did the most electrifying, highly sought-after wonder kid in football history go from carrying the hopes of a nation to what so many consider a highly premature footballing exile?
Well, the journey to that impossible hype started right outside the concrete jungle of São Paulo. His family struggled so deeply that they often went without basic electricity, and a young Neymar would ask his mom for simple cookies that they just couldn't afford. But his obsession with football was like a force of nature. He played relentlessly on the rough streets and utterly dominated in futsal. And if you know futsal, you know that's exactly where he developed that otherworldly, impossibly tight ball control. By the time he was just 14 years old, Real Madrid came knocking. I mean, who says no to Real Madrid at 14? But making a massive cultural statement, he chose to stay home in Brazil with Santos. He made his professional debut in 2009 at 17, and by 2011, he was carrying Santos to their first Copa Libertadores title, which is South America's brutal, incredibly passionate equivalent of the Champions League, for the first time since the golden days of Pelé. He was out there scoring unimaginable solo goals, like his Puskás Award winner, where he literally wove through professional defenders like they were training cones. He proved beyond a shadow of a doubt he was ready for the absolute highest level. So in 2013, he finally crossed the Atlantic to join the absolute titans of FC Barcelona.
And it was in Catalonia that Neymar officially transformed from a South American prodigy into a global superstar. Honestly, the absolute peak of his club career can be defined by one jaw-dropping statistic. Just let this number sink in for a second. 122. That is the staggering number of goals scored across all competitions in the 2014-2015 season by the legendary MSN attacking trio, Lionel Messi, Luis Suarez, and Neymar. But the thing is, this wasn't just a random collection of expensive stars thrown onto a pitch. It was pure tactical perfection. Messi provided the visionary genius, Suarez delivered the ruthless, physical finishing, and Neymar injected this explosive, completely unpredictable flair on the left wing. Together, they created arguably the most terrifying front three in the history of European football. They didn't just beat teams, they absolutely terrorized defensive lines. In that season alone, Neymar bagged 39 goals himself, remarkably scoring in every single match from the Champions League quarterfinals onward. They secured the ultimate prize, the Continental Treble, conquering La Liga, the Copa del Rey, and the Champions League. At this exact moment in time, Neymar was widely and completely rightfully viewed as one of the 3 best players on the entire planet.
But beneath the surface of all this historic, trophy-laden success, a highly complex dynamic was starting to brew. The defining moment of this underlying tension erupted on March 8, 2017, during a massive Champions League round of 16 clash against Paris Saint-Germain. Barcelona was practically dead in the water, down 4-0 from the first leg. They needed a literal miracle to advance, and Neymar delivered an absolute masterclass of sheer willpower. The stakes were astronomical, and the pacing of those final minutes was just heart-pounding. 88th minute, he hits a stunning, curling free kick. 91st minute, a cold-blooded penalty under immense pressure. 95th minute, a sublime, weak-foot lobbed assist into the box to win the tie 6-1. He literally carried the entire team on his back to complete La Remontada, the greatest comeback in Champions League history. But here is the brutal, tragic flaw in Neymar's Barcelona story. The defining image printed in newspapers across the globe the very next morning wasn't of Neymar's heroics. It was Lionel Messi standing triumphant like a footballing god before the Barcelona faithful. In that singular moment, Neymar realized a really harsh truth. Actually, scratch that, it was more of an epiphany. No matter what miracles he performed, he would always remain in Messi's towering shadow.
That realization right there sparked a burning, inescapable desire within him. Upon leaving Barcelona, his public reasoning was incredibly simple. He just claimed, "I need new challenges." But behind closed doors, experts, insiders, and even Brazilian legends like Romario knew the real truth. This was far more of a personal crusade than a purely sporting one. Neymar desperately wanted to be the undisputed main man. He wanted a mega club built entirely around his own unique talents. But most importantly, he was deeply obsessed with winning the Ballon d'Or, football's ultimate individual prize, which he genuinely felt he could never, ever achieve while sharing a locker room with the greatest player of all time. This burning ambition, combined with a desire to join the large Brazilian contingent in Paris, and look, let's be totally honest here, a mind-bogglingly lucrative financial package, served as the ultimate catalyst for the most shocking, seismic transfer decision in the long history of the sport.
The fallout of that decision was a staggering number that fundamentally broke the global football transfer market forever. 222 million euros. In the wild summer of 2017, Paris Saint-Germain brazenly triggered Neymar's release clause, absolutely shattering the world record for a transfer fee. I mean, it wasn't just broken, it was doubled. It was immediately dubbed the signing of the century. The Eiffel Tower itself was lit up in PSG's brilliant red and blue to welcome their new king. He was handed a contract that made him the second highest paid player in the world, earning roughly 36 million euros a year. But listen, with that unprecedented avalanche of money came impossible, totally suffocating standards. He wasn't just bought to win domestic league games in France, he was bought to legitimize an entire Qatari-backed mega project and conquer Europe. He was brought to Paris for one specific reason, to win the UEFA Champions League. The expectations weren't just high, they were absolute. Anything less than total European domination would be deemed a catastrophic failure.
But the Parisian fairy tale quickly mutated into a recurring physical nightmare. The objective reality of his time in France is incredibly harsh, and honestly, pretty staggering. Neymar missed roughly 38% of his team's official matches. That equates to 731 days of absence. Think about that. Over 2 full years of his absolute prime completely sidelined by brutal, repetitive injuries. His own body became his biggest enemy. He suffered devastating metatarsal fractures and horrific ankle sprains, which almost always seemed to strike right around the crucial February and March periods when the Champions League knockout stages began. Now, to be fair to Neymar, we have to look at the context of Ligue 1. Defenders were notoriously aggressive. It was basically a wrestling match out there sometimes, and they relentlessly targeted his ankles to stop him because they simply couldn't contain his dazzling footwork. A 2022 report actually confirmed he was the most fouled player in Europe. But the heartbreaking result of all those tackles was a severe physical decline. The Prince of Paris spent far too many defining nights watching helplessly from the stands on crutches.
And you know, this brutal physical toll bled directly into his international career, which is a cinematic saga of repeated, crushing heartbreak. The stakes for Brazil are unlike anywhere else in the world. A prodigy is demanded to bring home the World Cup every single generation. No excuses. In 2014, on home soil, with the weight of 200 million people on his shoulders, he was supposed to deliver ultimate glory. Instead, a terrifying knee to the back in the quarterfinals fractured a vertebra in his spine, an injury that was agonizingly inches away from paralyzing him for life. He had to watch from a hospital bed as Brazil suffered the darkest day in their footballing history, that infamous 7-1 slaughter by Germany. Then in 2018, recovering from a club injury, Brazil bowed out with a whimper to Belgium. And then came the ultimate tragedy of 2022. Neymar scored a spectacular, mesmerizing goal in extra time to tie Pelé's all-time scoring record. It was a beautiful, historic moment, only for it to be rendered entirely meaningless minutes later by a late Croatian equalizer and a heartbreaking penalty shootout defeat. 3 World Cups, 3 agonizing quarterfinal exits. As the physical injuries and tournament exits piled up, so did the severe, unyielding global backlash.
The criticisms came thick and fast. First, there was the excessive theatrics. The 2018 World Cup birthed the infamous, viral Neymar challenge, where rec league players and little kids globally mocked his Oscar-worthy roles on the turf, which severely damaged his reputation. Then came the off-field distractions. His private life became endless tabloid fodder. Critics constantly pointed to his lavish lifestyle, his high-profile relationships, and those frequent, highly publicized trips back to Brazil for events like his sister's birthday, even while he was injured. And underlying all of this were these really harsh accusations of him lacking professional commitment. A lot of pundits felt he simply didn't possess the relentless, almost psychotic, single-minded work ethic of a Messi or a Cristiano Ronaldo. Fans began to legitimately wonder if he was more interested in building a global celebrity brand than being a dedicated, suffering footballing leader.
It got to the point where footballing royalty began to view him not as a peer, but as a frustrating sideshow. Manchester United icon Eric Cantona brutally summarized the massive shift in public perception during that 2018 tournament. He famously called Neymar a great actor, and he compared him to a wheeled suitcase, stating, "You barely touch it, and it turns round and round for hours. Ouch." That quote perfectly encapsulates just how far his stock had fallen among traditionalists. To a huge portion of the footballing world, Neymar had completely transformed from a beloved generational prodigy into a highly divisive theatrical figure. And the environment turned incredibly toxic. He was actually booed and insulted by his own PSG fans at the Parc des Princes. They were alienated by his antics and perceived lack of loyalty, and he ultimately found himself trapped by a reputation he just couldn't seem to shake.
But look, to simply stamp his entire career as a pure failure is a massive oversimplification. And honestly, it completely ignores the undeniable genius of his game. We have to look at the expert analysis here. Yes, there is massive unfulfilled potential. He left Barcelona for a Ballon d'Or that he never won. He didn't bring that coveted Champions League to PSG, and he didn't secure the ultimate prize of a World Cup for Brazil. But statistically, the guy is an absolute all-time great. Let this sink in. He actually surpassed the legendary Pelé to become Brazil's all-time top scorer with 80 goals. He is the only Brazilian besides Pelé to score in 3 different World Cups. And tactically, his game evolved beautifully. Over at PSG, he transitioned from a flashy, touchline-hugging winger into a highly refined, tempo-dictating classic number 10, executing these impossible, vision-splitting passes. He remains the most fouled player entirely because he is undeniably one of the most dangerous, purely creative players the sport has ever witnessed. Furthermore, his impact on the modern culture of the sport is absolutely undeniable. In an era where modern football is increasingly dominated by rigid academy structures, robotic pressing systems, and deep tactical obsession, Neymar was a beautiful, chaotic anomaly. He single-handedly kept the spirit of Jogo Bonito, the beautiful game, alive. As David Beckham noted, he was a once-in-a-generational talent who literally pulled fans out of their seats whenever he touched the ball. And the actual players on the pitch, they recognize his sheer genius. When Spain won the 2024 Euros, their star winger Nico Williams actually dedicated the victory to his idol, Neymar. Emerging talents all across Europe cite him as their primary inspiration. So while the media and older generations might focus heavily on the theatrics, the new generation reveres him for providing a level of pure entertainment, flair, and street-style joy that is sadly fading from the modern game.
Which brings us to our final lingering question regarding this uniquely gifted athlete, a generational talent unfulfilled. Did Neymar fail football? Or did the brutal realities of modern football fail Neymar? Was it his own choices, his off-field distractions, and a lack of ultimate commitment that derailed his path to becoming the undisputed greatest? Or was he the victim of impossible, suffocating expectations, a brutal, unforgiving calendar, and relentless, career-altering physical targeting by defenders? Perhaps the true tragedy of Neymar Jr. isn't what he achieved, because let's be real, his trophy cabinet is overflowing and his stats are historic, but rather the haunting, unshakable shadow of what he could have been if the stars had just aligned a little differently. It's a highly complex legacy of brilliant, dazzling light and frustrating, painful shadows. So take a moment to really think about that, and let us know where you stand on football's most spectacular, polarizing prince. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those hard questions and keep learning.